And I'm going to switch things up. I'm going to describe some of the research that's been conducted on farmers and veterinarians. And I'm going to begin with talking about the relationship between humans and animals, and that the human-animal connection it's complex. It's influenced by several factors and it changes over time. In, for example, North America, there are a number of trends that are evident. For example, according to a recent survey in Canada in 2022, over 60% of households have a pet, and close to all of them, about 95%, identify their pets as members of their family. And there are many studies that identify this pet effect, that document the stress relieving, health promoting, and therapeutic benefits of animals. Farm animals included in this. And our relationship with animals, though, has shifted across time and across places. So what does that mean? So in some contexts, some animals that were once viewed as livestock or a primary economic investment are now increasingly viewed as pets or companions. And this is particularly true with horses, and it's reflected in the changing demographics of horse ownership in the US and Canada. So older horses are being kept on farms longer. The owners are investing, a lot of money to prolong their lives. My mom has she has a horse, and we're amazed that it's lasted this long. It's well into its 20s. But yes, she wants to ensure it has a healthy, long life, and is willing to pay those hefty costs to make sure it's the medicine that it needs. However, in other contexts, like Western Europe and some Asian countries, horses are still viewed as food sources. So with our pets or other companion animals, the relationship between farmers and their livestock, it's neither simple nor static. So herds of sheep or cattle that were, are not only a source of income, but they're an ongoing part of the lives of the farmers and the larger family unit. And that emotional connection between humans and animals that are raised, oftentimes from birth as a commodity, has been described as immensely respectful and devoted and even sacred. Next slide, please. So I thought I would give some personal context here. So Linda introduced me. I work at the University of Alberta at the Augustana campus in Camrose, which is surrounded by a lot of rural communities. But I was raised on a farm. My parents raised sheep, and I worked on a very large turkey breeder farm. And so these are actually pictures from that time. They're not fancy pictures. This is well before iPhones. But I worked on this farm for almost a decade. It's pretty much what got me paid for my way through school. So as you can see, there are many, many birds. And at this operation, there were 7 barns, and each of them held thousands of birds. And now these little ones, when they were about 20 weeks old, they would be moved down to the other barns, and they were laying. So they would lay fertilized eggs. So they were all female, and across the laying barns, we might collect, say, 1,000 eggs a day. There were 3-layer barns, and these would be processed, packed, and shipped all over the world. And sometimes my job would involve being assigned to one of these barns for an entire day. So I would spend a good part of my day with these birds, and they would habituate to you. You would become familiar with them, even though there's many of them, right? There would always be the ones that would follow you, peck at you, understand their distinct personalities. But there was the sort of a bonding that would happen even when you have a number of birds like this. So during my time there, one of the flocks was actually diagnosed with Orthobacterium rhinotracheal, known as ORT. And this is an acute condition that's very contagious. It affects the respiratory system of chickens and turkeys, and it's associated with a higher increased likelihood of mortality, decreased feed intake. And this was a big deal for the people I worked for, right? So all of their eggs essentially had been ordered, where they couldn't be shipped anywhere. Again, with, say, hundreds of eggs from one barn coming in a day, they were left at a huge loss. And so because this infected barn was close in proximity to the other 2 barns, there were really strict protocols put in place so that it would not spread to the other barns. And I remember that not only was this a huge loss, but it was an incredibly stressful time for the family. Next slide, please. So I'm going to share some research about the psychological impact of depopulation. I'm going to start with farmers. So as I mentioned, farm animals exist simultaneously as sometimes friends and sources of food or a commodity. And this lends to a blurring of those socially constructed boundaries or categories of livestock versus pet. Now, for some folks, they might consider farming too utilitarian or even exploitative because it involves raising animals that might eventually go to market. But for anyone who personally knows a farmer knows that they care very deeply about their animals. In fact, the data from our own studies show that caring about animals is an important part of a farmer's identity and farm culture. I'm going to share the findings from a study conducted in the UK in 2001. So this is during the foot and mouth epidemic. And I chose this study because it moved away from surveys and statistics, and it focused instead on conducting interviews with farmers and those involved in the depopulation process to understand what that experience was like. Next slide, please. Okay. So this was a study that was conducted by Convery and colleagues. And for their study, they wanted to understand how farmers and others, how their relationship to the land and livestock and the farming community changed. And I have quotes on the side from people that they interviewed. So they didn't just use interviews, however, they also had participants write in diaries, which helped the researchers to illustrate how their lives had been altered and disrupted by this crisis. And while it may be disingenuous to say that everything was in the garden was rosy before the outbreak, the farmers in the study drew their identity, self-esteem, well-being from their day-to-day environment. Farming, they recognized farming was hard, but it was still part of their life. But when the outbreak happened, their understanding of their place on the farm and everything within it changed dramatically. So some of these quotes you'll notice speak to what people from maybe the outside, teachers or small business owners, how their perceptions of the space and these farms changed over time. There's also an aerial photo here, so you can really get a sense of the scale of these for these farmers. And as noted by one farmer, they felt this enormous amount of shame that their farm had been impacted. And for a group of individuals who value privacy, their misfortune was happening for everyone to see. So for many, the calls brought a sense of failure, a loss of professionalism, a sense of not having done the job right. And common in farming, there's a sense of good stockmanship, whereby there's great pride and satisfaction in relation to processing and rearing a healthy stock. And further highlighting the fact that these events, they were on public display. And this quote from a teacher really illustrates that. And even though they were not personally impacted, they witnessed the effects on others. They were called the smell, and these families and places took on a new meaning for them. So next slide, please. So I decided to show this image, which was a detailed exploration included in this research study. And it really shows the multidimensional impact that depopulation can have on a family. So this is what's called sort of a life space, or the impact on just one individual. And I'm going to call her Carol. So Carol, she is a farm wife. She worked off the farm. And within this sort of illustration are snippets from either her interview or from her diary that really help us understand what impact depopulation had on her and her family. And she describes the immediate effects and residual fallout from the outbreak. It impacted her life, from her family relationships with immediate and extended family. Her children described having disturbed sleep, having nightmares, having their own health deteriorate, and other issues that were experienced, including having mistrust of government and her relationship with the community changed. And the family's essentially flock was called within farm buildings. And she describes what's known as like she describes as a family trauma, and it was within public view. And because where the farm, where the depopulation happened, was really close to the main road. And significantly for her, every day, place on the farm, that central component of her life space became associated with loss. And for Carol, these everyday places just took on new threatening meanings that lasted long after the depopulation process. Next slide, please. Okay. So I'm going to discuss the impact that this can have on the veterinarians. And, in the last 5 years, as the well-being of veterinarians has really been prioritized and evaluated as a profession with significant mental health challenges. And continuing our discussion with foot and mouth disease in the UK, that provided some US veterinarians some valuable experience in a national disease eradication event, and including observation of some of the effects that depopulation had on farm families and rural communities. So those were experiences that they were able to have there and bring back to help inform policy changes, practice changes. So at this time, though, when they were over in the UK, during the most intense periods of new case discovery and depopulation, some vets were involved in depopulation that may have lasted many days in succession. And so in addition to overseeing euthanasia and disposal, the vets were oftentimes the primary contact for these farmers. Their roles, were additionally stressful because they were charged with not just managing the livestock in this process, but also helping the farmers through this process. And the vets that were interviewed felt that the farmers found it easier to talk to them, as they were perceived to be able to relate to their issues better than maybe a community caseworker or a government staff. So what happened during these tours? The vets and technicians were debriefed upon returning to the US. And these debriefings usually involved, introductions to facilitators and participants and guarantees of confidentiality and written materials, etc. But the main stressors really included an awareness of inadequacy of training of technical protocols, sort of this inability to control chaos, not feeling a lot of efficacy in how to manage these interpersonal, relationships, and a lack of preparation about the consequences of how they would feel about their decisions made. And a lot of them experienced what would be described as post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. They had trouble sleeping, they had other behavioral and emotional reactions. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about the research. Next slide, please. Okay, so the responsibility of euthanizing animals under any circumstances can create a moral stress, and it's often called a caring-killing paradox. And veterinarians struggle with this to balance their own love for animals with the necessity to euthanize them. And they can create this tension in that they entered the profession to care for animals, not to put them down. And studies of those who work involving euthanizing animals have found that many individuals suffer from a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, but the preferred term is called participation-induced traumatic stress, or PITS. And unlike post-traumatic stress disorder, PITS doesn't involve a direct threat to the individual. So instead, it may threaten their ethical character, their identity as a vet who cares for animals, but yet must implement euthanasia. And this phenomenon includes its psychological and emotional impact. And it's usually studied around among shelter animals. It's rarely studied among vets. So the degree to which PITS can get worse, there's three factors. The first one is the bond that a vet might have with the animal. So vets reported fewer emotional difficulties euthanizing animals when they hadn't seen them before, when they didn't have a connection to that farmer and their livestock. Second is when there is an obvious sickness. So they experienced less distress when the animals appeared sick, and much more when they appeared healthy, but the protocol was to depopulate. And the third factor was the number of animals that needed to be put down in a single day. So PIDS was much more likely to happen when there was a large number of animals needing to be depopulated, and if that happened across successive consecutive days. Next slide, please. Perfect. Okay. So I want to talk about some specific findings, and these were findings from a study conducted recently in 2022. And I also focused on this because it included pigs, and a lot of the research doesn't include pigs. It focuses on foot and mouth disease or avian influenza. So I wanted to show that this is something that is experienced across a variety of livestock. So the goal of this study was to understand what is the mental health impact of swine veterinarians involved in mass depopulation. And these were events that were related to COVID-19. So they distributed a survey to veterinarians in the US, and they received responses from 134 vets. So what were some of the key findings? So first, they found that depopulation distress revolved around two factors. The first one was about this ethics of care, and this focused on the distress that vets felt working directly with farmers and with the pigs. And it centered around euthanizing animals that looked otherwise healthy, making decisions about whether or not to depopulate, choosing the right method, and also seeing the emotional toll that this took on their staff and the farmers. And the second distress factor was the perception of others. So this is the public looking in and what they might think about what's happening. And it might be the public, neighbors, even their colleagues, even their own family. And so it might be, would they feel they were worried about feeling criticism from others about putting down these animals. They also found that vets experienced a high rate of burnout. So burnout includes, it's multifactorial. It's this emotional exhaustion, feeling depersonalized and almost resenting your work, and feeling that you're just not doing a good job at what you normally would love to do. There was also about 1 in 10 vets, 10%, had thoughts of suicide within the past 12 months. And even though there was, about 17 or 16% indicated that they needed mental health counseling, many of them didn't get it. And when they were asked, why didn't you seek treatment, even though you recognize that you have mental health needs, the most common responses were they were concerned about counseling, who was going to be delivering it, taking time off work, and that it was expensive and their insurance didn't cover that cost. So it's these types of findings that have informed the work that we do. And we also recognize the need to enhance the availability of existing mental health services and take necessary steps to destigmatize mental health. I mean, we know that there are going to be stressors in farming that are beyond our control. And our goal is to really help ensure farmers, their families, and the agricultural community, including veterinarians, are resilient to those stressors. Next slide, please. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to maybe invite Linda to talk about our current and upcoming studies.
Thanks, Rebecca. So at AgNo, we want to be evidence-based, and we are really looking and wanting to make sure that we're addressing concerns and issues that are relevant to Western Canadian farmers. And so we are working with the U of A and Rebecca to do some studies to really help us understand what the situation is here in Alberta and where we can maybe have an impact on the mental health of our farmers, their families, and the agriculture community. So that includes the veterinarians and the people that support them. So right now we have an interview study on livestock depopulation. And what this is allowing us to do is to maybe form some recommendations around the process and how things roll out so that we could perhaps offer some ability to improve the way we support farmers that are going through a depopulation event, also for the vets that are going through that depopulation event. So we're just looking for farmers that have, and veterinarians who have experience with depopulation that would participate in an interview with our research team. You can link to that study. It's open right now on our website on the research page or also on the farmer page. You can register, and then someone from the research team contacts them, completely anonymous. And all of it is confidential. The information that we gather from there gets rolled up, but it's not one-on-one or singling anyone out. And it's also an opportunity to tell your story and be heard, because I know from the few farmers that I've talked to who've been through that, they feel kind of helpless in the situation. And so this is an opportunity to have your voice heard, have their story told, and maybe improve things as we move forward. Another one is the farmer stress and coping and resiliency study. This is an online survey monkey, and it mimics the stress and coping study that was done nationally. So we have very little evidence or information that is agriculture specific in Canada. And so the first study that was done in 2018 and then was done again in 2021 was just the stress and coping one. So this one mimics that, but it gives us a bigger sample size of what's going on in Alberta. If you look at the national recommendations that came out of the first study, a lot of them are address issues that are impacting Eastern Canadian farmers and aren't necessarily focused on our Western Canadian farmers. So this is an opportunity for us to get some really good data here in Alberta about the situation and what's important to the Western Canadian farmers, so we can make sure that the programs and services and as funding opportunities come and things roll out in Alberta, that it's really tailored to the needs of our industry here. Delivering services in rural areas is a study that was started because of our needs assessment. In our needs assessment, the service providers and people that are delivering or trying to deliver mental health services into the rural areas are having difficulty. How do we connect with our rural audience? How do we engage with farmers? What are those tips and tricks that maybe work well in a rural setting that maybe don't the things that work in an urban setting don't necessarily work in a rural setting. So we're trying to get a little bit of guidance for that, so that as people are developing programs and services, that give them maybe a better option or opportunity to make sure that they actually get adopted in our rural communities. And the last focus that we have is on farm transition. This study is not opened yet. It will be an interview study, and we'll just be exploring some of the impacts of that transition experience for farmers that are, as we're getting older. So there's only 9% of our farmers in Alberta are under the age of 35. And the rest of us are all a lot older than that. So there is a lot of farms that potentially could be transitioning. So what is the things that are holding people back, and how can we maybe improve or support that system as we move forward? So that's a little taste of what we're doing. You can connect with us through our website and on social media. If you subscribe to our newsletter, we have a monthly newsletter that goes out that just kind of highlights some of the new blog posts or resources as they're added to our website. We have a resources page that has a library, and so it'll just keep adding resources as we create them, and you can search them by topic and access them there. So we want to just, I think, yeah, we're getting close to the end. Do we have time for a question or two? If somebody has a question, we could probably entertain one. Okay, well, hearing none, we want to thank you for participating in our webinar. We'll be emailing all the participants a link to our event evaluation, and you'll have an opportunity, if you think of something you'd like to ask at that point, you absolutely can put it in that event evaluation. We'll follow up with you. So please just check your spam folder. We're having a little bit of difficulty with our emails. We're sorting out all those kind of things. So it might go to your spam. So just have a look in there. It should be sent out by the end of day today. And you can keep in touch with us, like I said, on social media. You can subscribe to our newsletter. You can visit our website every once in a while and just check out the news section and see what's new and happening at Agno. Is there anything else, Rebecca, that you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that's good. Like we always do with our webinars, we'll stay online a little bit longer in case anyone wants to connect with us one-on-one. But just thank you for joining us. We think this is important, and we're happy that to share this information with you. And also thanks to Dolores for joining us today with her expert knowledge from from her area.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Dolores. I'm just gonna turn off the recording if I can figure out how. It doesn't show up for me when I have